Great, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. We appreciate you joining us this morning. We have a lot of slides and a lot of data. So the one thing is, if you haven't registered or had your badge scanned, please do so when you leave also, because we'll send you all the charts and data. Most of you know IDC, we have about 1,000 analysts in 62 countries. Here's the HPC team, myself, Bob Sorensen's right here, and Lloyd Cohen's in the back there. So if you need help, just let us know. So a few things about what we've been doing lately. I think most of you know we try to track every server sold every quarter worldwide as our core data structure that we have. We also hold a lot of user forum meetings, and we have a fairly high publication requirement. Bob, I think it's exceeded 90 actually now, so is the requirement. But the one thing we've been doing lately is we found that the vendors are having a great difficulty determining how many systems they sell that go into HPC versus other areas. So we've had to switch our data collection to very large-scale surveys of buyers and users. Last year we exceeded 40,000 surveys. This year we'll probably be on the same order of magnitude. So when I say we do a lot of data collection, just tremendous amount of data collection. We are adding in, giving you snapshots of many of the studies we've done. But the one thing I want to mention is that, about 6 months ago, with all the data collection we were doing and comparing things, some numbers stopped adding up. I mean, we just couldn't reconcile certain things. And what we found was, in particular, the financial sector actually has been growing faster than we thought and much larger over the last 2 years. Basically, since the 2008-2009 recession, 2010, the financial sector didn't recover much, but it went into a much higher hyper-growth mode. So you're going to see us having to restate our numbers for the last 2 years on the financial sector. We have not landed exactly how large that is, but it's going to be on the order of at least a 50% increase of that sector. It may be larger than that. So it's a very substantial change there. In order for us to figure that out, we actually had to launch a separate set of surveys. So we've surveyed about 150 different financial institutions over the last 6 months. In addition to that, everyone's familiar with the high performance data analysis program we have. Bob's going to be going into details about that, but it's really where you have big data and big compute coming together. We are going to be adding 4 new industrial segments, and Bob will cover what those are, that's related to the HPD market area. So here's the agenda for today, and we realize we don't have our usual hour and a half here, so we're going to have to run through it quite quickly. The HPC market update, the market in Europe in particular, then what's going on in HPDA. For the last 2 years, we've come here showing you lots of examples of users. Now we're going to show you kind of what we're doing with all that information. We have over 350 specific examples where people have done HPDA. So that's the core of our structure, is having the real world what's happening out there. Then a quick update on our return on investment program, the user forum, and then the innovation program. Bob will be covering some changes there. And here's the website that we have, so we always invite people to come here. The main thing I want to point out here is for the user forum, this category prior presentations, in order to help the industry, we're trying to get information on buyers, vendors, and everything else. So in that section, you have the last 6 years of presentations from all of our 4 user forum meetings. So if you want to know what a national lab is doing or what the Chinese buyers are doing and vendors, and if you want to see what vendors said 4 years ago versus 3 years ago versus 2 years ago, you can actually use this as a data structure to see how the stories have changed. Here's our next set of meetings. Our next 2 in Europe will be in Paris and Munich in the same week. And we structure the international ones so it's very easy to travel to them, because it's midday Monday to midday Tuesday, then travel on Wednesday, midday Thursday, midday Friday. So we invite everyone to join in on those. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Bob for the introduction to the market update.
All right, thank you very much, Earl. We're going to go through a lot of these slides rather quickly, so if you've been scanned and registered in, you'll be able to get these electronically. So don't waste time trying to look at write down anything important, because they'll be made available to you after the meeting. If you look at some of the top trends in HPC, 2014 ended soft after a number of very strong years. 2012 was a really big year for the HPC sector. One of the reasons for this is top 5 system purchases have slowed for the last 2 years. If you were at the presentation yesterday on the top 500 list, there was some interesting analysis about how the highest end of the HPC sector has really slowed down in the last few years, and that will continue. Interesting, the IBM Lenovo deal has delayed many purchases. There was some uncertainty in the market, and we think that there's perhaps some pent-up demand in there, but it definitely had its impact on the market in 2014. So we said 2014 was basically flat compared to 2013, about $10.2 billion versus $10.3 in 2013. We're looking for growth in 2015 2015 to 2018 for a number of reasons. One of the big drivers in additional growth will be basically big data combined with HPC. It's creating lots of new solutions, lots of new applications, lots of new market potential there, adding many new buyers to the space. We're continuing to look at software issues. They're going to grow, and they're only going to get even worse as we see more heterogeneous architectures. We see deeper memory hierarchies. We see lots and lots of new applications in the HPDA space, and all of them are going to require interesting and increasingly complicated management of data movement across the entire workflow process, which means that while the hardware is critical, the ability of software to manage the increasingly complex flow of data movement is going to weigh heavily. If you get it right, things will look very good. If you get it even slightly wrong, you could have some real performance problems. We always say the issues are there, but it's going to only get worse. And GPUs and accelerators continue to extend their impact, even though we're still monitoring the extent to which GPUs and other accelerators are being used in production. We see lots and lots of activities and experiments in looking at the applicability of these things, but we're not seeing huge use of GPUs and accelerators in typical production environments. We're expecting that to increase as we move forward. This is just a quick article if you want to read a little bit more about some of the details that we had out in HPC Wire. I hate that picture, by the way. And look at the HPC Wire for more details, or if you want the actual article that IDC produced that this was based on, just drop me an email and I can send you the complete article. There's a lot more detail, and it's a little more measured discussion. Just quickly, if we want to look at one of the big top trends in HPCs that we're covering right now, it's the growing use of clouds in HPC environment. And we recently completed a survey. We looked at basically 157 sites and asked them a simple question: do you use cloud computing for any of your HPC workloads? And we're looking at an increase in the use of clouds for HPC workloads. And in this particular snapshot taken very recently, almost 25%, more than 25% are using cloud computing for some form of HPC workloads. And then if you zoom in on those particular sites and you ask them how much of your workload is being done on the clouds, it's almost a third is being uploaded to clouds. Do want to caution that right now the general sense is what these sites are uploading are what we would call the low-hanging fruit, some of the embarrassingly parallel stuff that really doesn't require very specific architectures or say custom interconnects. It's really the kind of the easy, embarrassingly parallel stuff at this point, but we expect as time progresses people are going to become a lot smarter in how to balance their in-house HPC workloads with uploading things to the cloud for performance or cost reasons. Other trends we're looking at right now: very interested in non-x86 processors, how they could alter the landscape. Alternate chip architectures such as ARM and Power and coprocessors are expanding the potential mix of the kind of HP systems that can be put out there. Interested in continually looking at what China is doing, specifically now post the IBM Lenovo deal. And we're also looking at other Chinese vendors planning to extend to Europe and other places. We were down on the show floor yesterday looking at Shugan, and they have a very aggressive program for expanding into the East Asia market. They're looking at Russia, they're looking at Eastern Europe as places to move offshore out of China. There's some interesting developments we think are going to be happening there. We're looking at the growing influence of the data center and the IT food chain, and as we said before, HPC in the cloud gaining traction. It's something that we're very interested in doing because it really is an interesting and potentially ground-changing way for the HPC world to be operating. Other things we're looking at in terms of the other top trends: storage is the fastest growing part of the HPC market. It's no surprise that people are looking at more data collection, more data analysis, and that this is being reflected in increased storage requirements, new requirements for different kinds of storage, for structured, unstructured data, all sorts of different kinds of data to bring to bear in analytics problems. So we're looking for basically record levels in storage revenues. The storage market at this point is relatively fragmented. Certainly within the HPD sector, we haven't seen anything coalescing into a generally agreed upon way of doing business. It's pretty much Wild West out there right now, and we don't think that that's going to settle down very soon. Same to some extent in the HPC interconnect market. We have the usual players, the InfiniBand, Ethernets. Intel is making some movement in this area, and there's lots of interesting custom architectures out there for interconnects. To me, this is one of the more interesting variables in terms of HPC architectures that I think bears watching over the next few years. Data movement is going to become a major pain point. The emphasis on pure computational capability continues to ebb away, where the issues of making sure that the data is at the right place at the right time is going to be increasingly a crucial determinant of how effective your overall workload is. And ultimately, we're looking for HPDA to boost storage budgets across the board. And I'm going to turn it back over to Earl for some of the
Great, thanks,
some
Bob.
of the numbers.
There you go. Thank you. So I'll walk through the basic market numbers that we have right now. So here's how 2014 turned out. Except for the top 10 systems, the whole market actually grew dramatically. But the amazing part, when Bob mentioned that there's been a flatness in the market for about 3 years running right now, it's purely around the top 5 to 10 systems. If you strip that out, then the rest of the market's growing dramatically. So this is something we've been struggling with now for a couple years, and our plan right now is we're going to, in the next iteration here, introduce a 5th competitive segment. And the 5th competitive segment is going to be all around the top 10 systems. And we're not sure what we're going to call it. Hopefully something exciting like leadership computers or something like that. But what we decided is because the market dynamic around those top 5 or 10 machines are just totally different. The buying criteria, how they're used, how much R&D is thrown with it. The percent of R&D versus the server itself is actually quite large. So you'll be seeing that in the next iteration here. But this is how the market shaped up in 2014. Here's it is as far as the trend line, and this is what I was mentioning. If you look at supercomputers, they went through this massive growth between 2010 to 2012, effectively doubled in size. And then the market went back down to more of an average norm to it. But that was all around the top 10 systems, because what we had here is a $550 million system, a $350 million system, and a $250 all in 1 year. And those 3 systems drove that whole segment. And that's why we'll be changing that. And if you look at the bottom 3 lines, which people often call the volume portion of the market, extremely healthy recovery there. So here's the big news. We've been talking about this for the last year and a half. The IBM Lenovo split up and how it's changed the market dynamics and the ratios of the industry. So the industry for the last decade basically was tied with 2 major vendors. HP and IBM had on the order of 30-34% each, for the last 10 years. And then you had Dell at half that, about 15%. And then all the other vendors were, a couple percent or lower. The market now is completely different. HP is the market winner right now. It's on the order of a third of the market. It's 36% here because they had a few Q4 sales that slipped to Q1. So the 36% is a little on the high side. And then you have the other vendors sitting here, and we were expecting to see 3 vendors around 15%. And as Bob was mentioning, the real shock here is the IBM decline was higher than we were expecting. So right now, IBM is sitting at around 5% of the market. So just dramatic. We were expecting IBM to land closer to about 12 to 14%. So the new market dynamic is there's 1 vendor that's about a third of the market, 2 vendors that are semi-tied at around 15%, and then it quickly drops to 1 vendor at 5%, and then the other players. And whenever I show these charts, I always have to mention, for Cray and SGI, don't read anything into a 1-quarter number, because Cray is going to have a 4th quarter that's going to be, 3 times their market share. So you really have to average the smaller vendors on that part. So this is the biggest change in the market that we have right now. Oh, the other thing I should mention is Q1 showed 10% growth over Q1 last year. When Bob was mentioning we're forecasting 2015 to 2018 to have strong growth, we actually think 2015 is going to exceed our growth projections. It may be as high as 12 to 14% growth for the whole year. But anyways, this year is looking very strong. Here's just the same thing for the supercomputer segment. Again, you can see this still has kind of that historic weighting where HP and IBM are somewhat similar. This was 2014, and again, just tremendous shifts are taking place on this part, and no surprise, Lenovo is going to have a major portion there. Then how does the market look as far as by the industrial segments? I mentioned earlier on, and this has our old numbers for finance, is for 2014, the financial segment was about $350 million. That's going to go up by at least 50%. Now, I always have to hesitate because our numbers right now are showing much higher than 50% it needs to increase by. But until we get all the survey work and all the numbers together, and that's why I can at least safely say minimally it's going to go up by 50%. Bob's going to also talk about 4 new segments that are going to be added in here. And they're around the HPD areas, things like fraud detection, security, and so on. And with that, I'd like to talk about the forecast very briefly. So right now we're forecasting between a compound annual growth rate between 2014 to 2019. The supercomputers around 9.8%. The reason the rate is so high is because 2014 was low. So sometimes when you're looking at endpoints. The divisional, departmental, but you can see everything here is growing at a very healthy, on the order of 8% growth is what we're looking at. And then the broader market, so everything I've kind of covered so far is just the servers. This then layers on the external storage, middleware, application software, and the service line here is just maintenance repair services. This does not include professional services and everything else. But that roughly doubles the market. So we're forecasting now by 2019 the market will exceed $30 billion in value. And then as far as what's going on in Europe, to give a European perspective, Europe has done fairly well on the supercomputer side for the very large systems. About 7 years ago, or 5 to 7 years ago, Europe had really declined as far as the high end of the market. Basically, what Europe historically has been on the order of 29–30% of the world market. It declined down to almost 20%. But then a tremendous recovery, primarily due to Germany, France, and the UK. Quite frankly, as far as their purchases and investments. And then you can see similar growth here, but a little bit less growth as far as in the other lower end segments. And then on the processor viewpoint, keep in mind, we track revenues, number of system, processor cores, nodes, and everything else. The European market right now is projected to be about 1.3 million processors, growing from roughly just under, or on the order of about 1 million processors today. And then here are the industrial segments for Europe. Again, as I always have to mention, is the financial one will change directly because we have to restate that, and we'll be adding the other 4 in there. But it kind of shows you which the major segments are. No surprise, the government lab and the universities are very large segments here. And then the broader market across Europe, again, you can see this is where storage, as Bob was saying, is about 1%. Sometimes it's 2% faster growth rate than all the other segments. We do track the middleware very heavily because we're trying to figure out, as Bob was mentioning, all the software pretty much has to be updated, changed, and that. When will buyers actually start spending more money on the tools to update their software and the applications? And we're seeing a little improvement there, but not dramatically. And then by country, we also wanted to include this in the package. And so we right now are tracking 27 countries around the world. The bulk of them are across Europe. So this kind of shows the spread across Europe as far as the individual country purchases. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Bob.
Or
did you want me to cover?
You're going to do these two, right?
Oh, I'm going to do these two, okay. So I think a lot of you remember 3 years ago, the EU had hired us to do an analysis of how can Europe have a leadership position in high performance computing by 2020. And when we were hired to do that, the general feeling of the commission was that we should recommend how Europe can design and develop its own exascale machine. And our major message was, don't worry about the hardware, it's all about the software and what you do with the computer, the end use and the application. So what you want to do is really pick out application areas that Europe is already strong in and invest in that side of the equation. Now also in the recommendations we said, you do have to have a lot of computers out there. So you have to increase the amount of computers you're purchasing. And at that time, basically, Europe had to double. I mean, it was that far off the mark. Normally when you do studies like this, it's resolutions like 5% growth here, 10%. But the recommendation is Europe basically had to double. And the good news is they hired us for this study that we're just finishing right now this week, and it's an assessment of progress to date and what next needs to be done. And we would be more than happy to send the whole report to anyone who wants it. So if you send us an email, it was just finalized last night. Right. The final edits went through. But basically we're recommending that Europe needs to step up to, again, substantial more system purchases. In 2020 to purchase 2 semi-exascale machines, meaning like maybe a half an exascale, and on the order of 250 million each, and then by 2022 to purchase 2 additional exascale machines at around 350 million each. We're also suggesting that Europe takes 2 paths for those sets of procurements. One would be very safe standard technology, likely x86, but it could be just something that's is guaranteed is there because it's an asset for people to use. And the other one would have something more innovative, some kind of European-based technologies wherever you can in the system to kind of have 2 paths. In addition to buying lots of additional systems, and then like I said, our whole message is around applications and software. So you'll see in the report, most of the report talks about what needs to be done to get users using the machines more effectively. And like I say, it's the whole assessment was here on that part. And then I'll hand it back to Bob then for the HPDA update.
Thank you. All right. Quick definition, IDC, in its simplest sense, defines high-performance data analytics as basically big data analysis that requires an HPC, whether due to data complexity or time constraints or other issues that require a high-performance computer to actually do the big data analysis. If you just look at how HPDA adoption has changed over time in the 60s and so, it was much more of a government academic kind of thing, and what we've seen in the last 20, 30 years is the sense that big data and HPDA has really become integral to a number of business operations around the world. It's moved its way into the scientific and engineering communities. It's basically reached a point now where it is standing almost shoulder to shoulder with the traditional modeling and simulation environment in the traditional HPC sector. IDC does have a large HPDA program, and you can see here some of the core research, forecast of server revenues, storage revenues, some of the HPD applications, and you'll see when we get to the discussions of the new sectors we're adding, you'll see how we're breaking down the HPDA sector from monitoring from a revenue standpoint. Some of the key questions here, and here are some examples of some research we've done just recently on HPDA analysis. At this point, it's pretty much a broad brush and look, just trying to get a sense of how to stake out the particular market, because it is one that's rapidly evolving, and there's not the sense of a formal construction or infrastructure right now within the HPDA world. It's again, as I said before, somewhat Wild West-like. I was talking to some folks a couple days ago about this, and they just said the bottom line is it's in the HPDA world, this is just time to simply embrace the chaos of what's going on out there, because we're seeing new applications, new use cases on almost a daily basis at this point. This is IDC's forecast for revenues within the HPDA sector that as you can see, we're projecting strong growth out certainly until 2017 and beyond. This is when we talked before about the 4 new categories within the applications that we're going to be covering. Here was what they are. We're looking at fraud and anomaly detection. We're looking at marketing. We're looking at business intelligence, and then the catch-all basket is other. And these new sectors are the ones that are going to be driving the reevaluation and the restating of some of the IDC numbers, and driving some of the changes that we have to put into some of our estimates from a few years back. And as we go forward, this will be an increasingly larger percentage of the applications for the HPDA segments. Here's some of the just a quick snapshot of some of the findings that we've come across, and basically we just again finished another survey where we talked to a number of HPC user sites. At this point, we talked to 128, and just said that of all the workloads on your system, what percentage of your total system utilization is devoted to big data analytics, and 22.7% said that answered yes to that, and we're expecting some growth in that within the next 6 to 18 months to well over a quarter. And if we ask them what are the top 3 applications that you're doing data-intensive analytics on, graph analytics, semantic analysis, and knowledge discovery were mentioned by a significant percentage of our respondents. And just quickly, we're looking at some of the other trends in HPDA, such as machine learning, deep learning, cognitive computing, some of the more forward-leaning, still under development kinds of applications within HPDA. Machine learning is within the HPDA market is different from the kind of machine learning that we see in the typical IT sector, simply because you're generally working on bigger data sets, and the issue here in many cases is you're working under, as we said, time constraints or a much more complex variety of input data, and asking simply tougher questions or demanding more from the existing data that you have. Quickly put, the HPDA market opportunity, we're looking at simulation and newer high performance analytics coming together, a merging of the traditional modeling and simulation within the HPD world, working within the HPC world in conjunction with the HPDA growth. We're looking at the high-end commercial analytics converging. So really what we're seeing is multiple convergence. You've got the HPC modeling and simulation world. We're moving towards HPDA analytics, as well as traditional business analytics that was being done on traditional IT infrastructures, for example, within the financial sector for things like risk analysis and such, and that is also migrating into the HPDA world. So we're actually seeing a couple of different sectors kind of zeroing in on this HPDA opportunity. we're tracking, as I said before, a lot of economically important use cases, certainly within the financial sector. The interesting and sometimes troublesome aspect about the financial sector is that for them it's a competitive advantage, and I can save you some time. Sometimes going to an HPDA or an HPC meeting in the financial sector, people are not going to be terribly forthcoming about what their particular value added is. So it presents some unique problems. It's not as collaborative, the kind of environment as you'd have it at perhaps a meeting like this where people are eager to share results. It's much more of a let's keep our competitive advantage within the room here. Create some interesting problems, but also create some interesting economic use cases that are interesting. The bottom line to all this, as we said before about embracing chaos, is there's no single HPDA solution out there. It seems to be very one-off. It seems to be much more ad hoc. One of the phrases I've heard of late in this sector is the idea of Kleenex code. The idea of I've got a question, I write a piece of code, and it answers my question, and then the code just goes away. So think of it as like using a tissue essentially to wipe your nose. You get the job done, and you're finished with that particular thing. And we get more and more of the sense of just answer the question today, because the broker or someone who needs a decision, they just want an answer. They don't want a piece of code that's going to be optimized over the next 25 years. They just want to know the answer, and they're done with that question, move on. It kind of changes the way we're going to be looking at how this particular sector evolves, because it's somewhat of a different model than the traditional HPC sector.